All right. Well, welcome everyone. I'm so glad that you're here with us. Whether you are joining this live right now or you're viewing this later as a recording, we're really glad to have you here. My name is Naomi Hoffer. I'm the program manager for the Sheri Sobrato Brisson Brain Cancer Survivorship Program. And with us also in the Zoom background is Mary Destree, who is our and you might be seeing messages in the chat from Mary throughout this presentation. So this webinar is part of our regular Living Well After Brain Cancer Treatment webinar series, which is a segment of our growing survivorship program at the UCSF Neuro-Oncology Clinic, whose mission is to enhance the wellness and quality of life of persons living with brain tumors through a collaborative, multidimensional approach focusing on emotional, physical, and cognitive health. And certainly a large part of emotional health can be relationships. They can really make all the difference in the life of a person living with brain cancer, as there can be a great reliance on loved ones throughout this course of disease. So over the many years working with caregivers and survivors, we've come to know some of the struggles experienced by each caregiver and survivor. So I want to just present to you some of what we've gathered over the many years. Now, this isn't everybody's experience, but here's an example of some of what we've heard from caregivers over time. The trajectory of my life and our future together has changed dramatically. We didn't plan for this. And now I have to double my workload and responsibilities when I was already at capacity. I need support, and the person I would normally turn to for support is not available to me in the same way. My life partner has changed. I'm angry, grief-stricken, and exhausted. And above all, I feel so guilty when I'm not as compassionate as I truly want to be. I want to be strong for both of us, but I feel like I'm at my breaking point. And from those diagnosed with brain cancer, I am struggling. I've been shattered into a million pieces, and I'm trying to put my life back together from the inside. I'm exhausted, just trying to do the best I can to make it through the day. I don't have the energy to argue. I want to feel better. I want to be back to my old self, but as hard as I try, I don't think I will ever get to be where I was. I need understanding. So as we can see, these are two very different realities faced by caregivers and patients. And so how do we start to bridge this chasm so that couples can face cancer together and really gain strength from one another? So today we're going to be talking about that in depth. We'll start by reviewing some of the unique challenges faced by couples living with brain cancer, and then hear the 7 proven principles for making relationships work, along with activities you can start right away. You'll have a chance to ask questions, and you can do so anonymously by using the Q&A function. And as you know, we normally have a survivor voice on these webinars, but this is a sensitive topic, and we wanted to respect the privacy of both our survivors and our caregivers. So we'll be waiting until the unrecorded after the show segment to provide a chance for you to hear directly from each other. We also want to make sure we give enough time to cover all the rich material and activity recommendations by our guest presenter. So whether you're single or with your partner today, please join us after the show, and you can learn from others and spend more time with Dr. McNulty integrating this material. We'll give you instructions on how to do that at the end of this presentation. So now it is my absolute honor and privilege to introduce our guest speaker for today's topic. Mike McNulty is one of the first 5 master trainers named by the Gottman Institute. He is a certified Gottman therapist in 2005 and certified Gottman workshop leader in 2007. And he co-leads the Art and Science of Love, a weekend workshop for couples with Sinead Smith. Primarily, he leads these in Chicago and in Oakland, California. But since 2017, Dr. McNulty has presented this workshop over 50 times throughout the US. He has trained and consulted with hundreds of therapists seeking to learn the Gottman method in the US, Ireland, and Sri Lanka. He has been quoted in the Business Insider, Parade.com, Thrive Global, and many other media platforms. He loves bringing this method to couples and clinicians to help them improve relationships. So Dr. McNulty, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here today and to help us really learn more about how we can thrive in our relationships. I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Oh, great, Naomi. Thank you so much. And thank you, Mary. And it's just a pleasure for me to be here with this group. I've had so many people in my family battle cancer. I have a number of cancer survivors in my family. And I just I think that these principles have so much to offer for all that you're facing, and how tricky it is to face what you face. Can you see it now?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank
Okay,
you. Can you?
great. Thank you. Sometimes I just find I have to restart the whole computer when something happens, and I apologize for that. Again, I'm so excited to be here today um, to talk with you about using these Gottman skills, which I find help so many people in their relationships. To those of you who you and your partners are facing brain cancer together, and so and I always think, of course, is um, brain cancer not only being faced by the person who is diagnosed, but by the partner as well, because it has such an impact on both of you. And there's so many different changes that people need to really contend with as they're facing this. Um, see here. I think what I was saying before was that I've lost a number of relatives to cancer, and I've had a number of relatives survive cancer. And so I'm really aware of the issues that are involved, and have the utmost respect and concern for people who are facing them. Facing brain cancer results in an ever-changing new normal. I had the point made to me earlier today that it's not just a new normal, but it's a new normal that changes so much, and it's stressful clients for clients for a variety of reasons, or to people who are diagnosed for a variety of reasons. The diagnosis can involve uncertainty regarding the diagnosis and the prognosis. Um, there's a always some uncertainty that people are facing in terms of how things will unfold with their treatment, and sometimes there is uncertainty about the diagnosis. 82% of people diagnosed with brain cancer will face cognitive changes that will at least temporarily affect their ability to function, and so that changes their lives, that changes their partners' lives. Often, the partners become the primary caregivers or case managers. And so it's a difficult place to be in. I love those quotes at the beginning, that just sort of emphasize both persons' dilemma, and how the one person gets overwhelmed with just living with cancer and then having to deal with it, and the other person gets overwhelmed with the pressures of caretaking and helping the first person to manage themselves. And I was thinking, as Naomi mentioned, for people who are couples, that this, applies to them. It does. And of course, it also, the same principles John Gottman found, the person who developed this theory with his wife and partner, Dr. Julie Gottman, found that really these same principles also apply in our closest relationships. So if a close friend or a family member is sort of functioning in that primary role for you, or if you're that person, then a lot of these same skills and techniques that I'm talking about will apply to you. But anyway, so the situation that people are in results in stress and tensions in the relationship. And that can be really confusing for folks. And it can, lead to a lot of negative feelings that people are having a hard time understanding or relating to. And it can become conflictual. So the relationship needs added attention to guard against this ever-changing new normal that people are facing, so that it doesn't become divisive. And if managed well, the relationship remains or becomes a place where both partners unite and support, feel united with one another and supported by one another. And that's hopefully what these tools will help people to do. I think that Susan Johnson once said that it's trauma isn't really so much the issue for people, it's facing trauma alone. And if people can be connected with one another and feel secure in those connections, it just makes a world of difference. So today I'd like to go over with you John Gottman's Sound Relationship House. And actually, I should call this Dr. John and Dr. Julie Gottman's Sound Relationship House. Dr. John Gottman is a researcher who has been studying relationships since 1972, and he's really the foremost researcher on relationships in the world. And he saw 3,000 couples and studied some that lasted as many as 20 years. They were all longitudinal studies to try to determine why relationships succeed or fail, and to try to better understand that. And so his relationship is really fascinating. I mean, his research is really fascinating. I don't have the time to get into that too in-depthly today, but I'd encourage you to read more about it if you have time. He and his partner, they were having, I think, what we call the famous canoe ride, where Julie and John were in a canoe, and Julie said, "Hey, John, you've done all that work on relationships, all that research on relationships. Have you ever thought about anything to, about doing something with it to really help people?" And John said no. He liked research. He didn't like treatment so much. And Julie then asked 2 or 3 more times. And John always jokes that then they compromised and did what she wanted and developed this theory. And it's based on, it's really based on his research. So one thing I should say is that part of why he's so famous is after doing all this research, he developed a mathematical model whereby he can look at partners on video having a conflict discussion for 15 minutes and determine with 90% accuracy whether their marriage will succeed or fail in the next 2 years and whether or not they'll be happy. So that is a huge finding, in research and psychological research prior to his being able to achieve that. The gold standard was just 9%. If people could get 9% accuracy in terms of their predictions of what would happen based on their research, they were considered to be hitting the gold standard. And he and his partner who did his research with him, Dr. Robert Levinson, who's here in the San Francisco area, basically hit 90%. So that's why this information is so powerful. He really did exhaustive research over many, many years and came up with something that really works. So he and his wife and partner, who's also a psychologist, who's more of a therapist originally than a researcher. Now they're both researchers and therapists, but back then they were just, one was more the researcher and the other was more the therapist. And so together they came up with these principles that make marriage work based on John's research. And there's 7 principles here in this framework. Each one of them helps make relationships work. And if there's a problem in an area for any couple, there's exercises for each level that help you to put this principle into action more in your marriage. So the bottom of the Sound Relationship House has to do with building a good, strong friendship, that partners do better together if they have a good, strong friendship. So that's always important to work on that. And basically a good, strong friendship leads to positivity between the partners, emotional intimacy, romance, and physical intimacy. So if a relationship is going really well and there's a lot of positivity between partners, that's what happens. The middle of the house is about managing conflict. And what was so interesting about Dr. John Gottman's research is he found that when you think of the common problems that come up for all partners, who are married or who are, again, if people have siblings or parents or something, or close friends as caregivers who are working closely together, that when you bring two personalities together, 69% of the time, when they have to work on the things that come up between them, they'll be in different places because they have different personalities and different fundamental needs. So that makes really living with someone else and working with someone else quite difficult. If they have these different perpetual problems that we talk about, this 69% perpetual problems, then if they're in dialogue about them, where they're able to go back and forth and understand where each other is coming from and be respectful to each other, then they're okay. But when the dialogues break down and they become gridlocked, so much so that people just really don't feel comfortable talking about the issue with each other, that's a problem. And so what we're always trying to do in the Gottman method is to help people manage conflict. We don't think that, we think solvable conflict is overrated, but we think people being able to hear each other out, understand each other, and find their compromises and to be able to live with their differences is the way to go. And I'll talk more a little bit later about that works. But when I'm talking about potential perpetual problems, I'm talking about things like, how do we keep the house? How do we treat the in-laws? How do we deal with the kids? How do we manage the budget? How do we manage our own physical intimacy? How do we manage our relatives? So these sorts of problems and many others I think you can think of. But for most partners, again, that 69% of the problems they face together will be problems where they'll always be at least in slightly different places. It's only 31% of the time that they should expect to be able to sit down and use some good problem solving skills and figure out what works right, what's the best plan that they'll both agree upon. That only happens about 31% of the time. I remember my grandmother on her 60th wedding anniversary, someone asked her, have you ever considered divorce? And she was this little old Irish lady. And she said, divorce, no; murder, yes. And she had a great marriage, but it's just hard to live with someone who's so close to you. And it's that much harder when you're facing something so stressful as brain cancer. And so really working with these skills that help people to manage conflict is that much more important. The next level of the house is about making life dreams come true. So when people talk about their conflicts and get to where they're coming from and why, they usually reveal some of their life dreams in the process of the things that are most important to them. And so the advantage to being able to have conflict discussions well means that ultimately people will be better poised to be in touch with each other's life dreams. And I think that, again, that particularly applies to people who are facing cancer and facing brain cancer, that, there's probably going to be conflicts that come up that have to do with the brain cancer and the recovery plan and, and how life will work with that. The partners may have different positions on, whether one partner should work or not, et cetera. There's so many different problems that come up that I won't get into all of them, but I'm sure a number come to mind for you guys as you're thinking of them. But the more, again, that these can get dialogued about, the better. And often what's at the root of them are important dreams that people have. And if you can make those dreams known, often it can be, possible for partners to help each other make their life dreams come true. And so at the top of the house is about creating shared meaning. And this is what people do to just have a really meaningful relationship. They look at the rituals that they have together. that are meaningful to them. They look at their goals, and maybe they re-examine their goals. They look at the roles they're both playing in life. One role in this situation might be caregiver, another one might be someone being more in the patient role as they pursue the cancer treatment. But so are they supporting each other's roles well? And then they look at what do important things mean to them? Like, what do work-life balance mean? What does making love mean? What does what does home mean? What does money mean? All those kinds of things. So that's up at the top of the house. Now, these two walls on the side are about trust and commitment. So trust is, you have trust in a relationship when you feel like your partner has your back. Like if you have to compromise about something, for instance, then if your partner is, if it's one of those compromises where you have to kind of give more and they get more, if you'll feel a lot better if your partner's checking in to make sure that you're getting enough. That's a good idea of having someone's back. Or if you're upset about something, and maybe it's even about your partner, when your partner stops and listens to you, that's a sense of having your back. Even if it's about them, they want to understand, they want to know what's going on, they want to try to help you with it. So that's what trust is, a sense that your partner has your back. The other side of the house, the other weight-bearing wall, is commitment or investment in the relationship. And so that's when people, cherish their relationship, they invest in their relationship, they still see their relationship as very, very important. And sometimes I think when people can cherish and when they're invested and they can commit, it's more workable to be present, during, a time when they're facing an ever-changing new normal. So this is the basic house, and I wanted to kind of give you the whole theory up front. Now I'd like to go through each level of the house and talk about them to kind of acquaint you to them. And as we start, one of the things I want to say is we do have like workshops where we teach these skills. I work with someone in Oakland and I teach them there. I also teach them in the Chicago area. And, and also they're available online. They're available in other cities. So I just want to make sure that you're all aware that those are there. But, if time prohibits your getting there, or if that's just not going to work for you, what you can do is buy either this book, The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, this best-selling book written by Dr. John Gottman that sort of summarizes his research, and then all these levels of the house and the exercises that go with them that help people to, to work on their relationship well. And so that book is so helpful. It's only about $10. And then also, besides that, there are these Gottman card decks. And so in your app store, on your Apple phone, or in your, in your Android app store, you can find these free, Gottman card decks. And what they basically have done is taken a lot of these exercises that I'll talk about today and turn them into fun games that you can play that kind of help you to put them into action more in your life. And so these are other quick ways to get the materials you need to really work on your relationship and work on the kinds of things that I'll talk about tonight. And I just assume that with the people out there, that some people have great relationships and just feel, they're doing really well being together, and that's terrific. Other people find this more challenging. That's expected. So, but all these exercises are designed for everyone and help people who are doing well hold on to what they have and maybe even build on it some more, and help people who are struggling get things back to a better place. So the first level of the house, the first level of the relationship friendship, the foundation of the relationship friendship is building love maps. And so building love maps is about knowing your partner, building a map in your mind of your partner's worlds. So So when we have a map in our mind of our partner's world, we might know the key cast of characters in our partner's lives, the things they're looking forward to, the things that they're dreading, the people who are their close friends, the people who really annoy them, the things they love to do, all this kind of stuff. The folks at work who are difficult to deal with, or the more you know about your partner and your partner's world, the better. And the more you feel known by your partner, the better too. So what we want people to do is build a map in your mind of your partner's world. And I've included this exercise, and I'm hoping that the PDF of this presentation could be sent out to all of you so you could work with it. But the first exercise is a love map exercise, and it's kind of fun. You sit down and you both fill out the exercise, and then you share your answers. It's kind of like that game, the dating game, if people remember that, where I think the newlyweds, except they would leave the room and then their partners would fill out a bunch of questions about them, and then they'd come back and they'd answer them too and see if they got it right. But this is what this game is. And what you want to do when you do this game is, just check in to make sure you know about what's going on in your partner's world. And what I love about this love map is it kind of includes things that are important and things that are more trivial. And it includes both, and both are kind of fun, I think. And the important stuff is important to know, and the more trivial stuff is good too. And so this is an exercise I'd like for you to think about trying. What I was also thinking about, though, is when you're in brain cancer recovery, there's probably a bunch of other questions that are so important to kind of know. And so I just kind of came up with some off the top of my head. If you want to add other ones into the chat, that would be great. Or during the second session, we could talk about those. But the love map questions for couples facing brain cancer might be, you'd have these additional love map questions, where you'd ask each other, what are your feelings about the recovery process? What are your concerns in reference to are both kind of facing brain cancer? You're facing it together, even if only one person has it. What's the recovery plan? Who are the key cast of characters on the medical teams? What are the personalities of the people like? And what support does the partner receiving the treatment need from the other partner? Who are the key persons that the partner finds supportive, both maybe on the medical team, but in life? And sometimes I think it's also good to know who are the well-meaning people who keep showing up, who annoy your partner too, so that you can help do some crowd control for the other partner. Can help with that. What are and it's good also for the partner who's diagnosed to know who feels supportive to the other partner and who doesn't. What are the stresses for you related to living with brain cancer or being a caregiver? So knowing more about those stresses and just hearing them out, and not taking them personally or getting defensive or anything like that, but just hear kind of what it's like to be in each other's shoes. Cancer is the enemy, and you're both in different shoes trying to work with the situation. The more people can be understood, the better. Also, what we want to be thinking about are things like, what are your fears and what are your hopes? And what are the wishes or dreams during this time? So what are the things that are really important to the persons that they do together or that they do? And, what would they like to do that they haven't done before? How would they like to be spending this time? I should say then that the other love map tools there's love map cards in the Gottman card decks. And I like those because they can get really trivial. Like, what's your partner's favorite song or your favorite favorite tree, or all this obscure stuff that you may or may not know about your partner. And so those, I think, are really important to look at, and they're fun. John and Julie Gottman would say that they would take them somewhere and maybe nurse a cup of coffee or a cup of wine, and just ask each other these questions back and forth, and where the person picks up a card, then they answer them about their partner, and if they get them wrong, the partner just gently corrects. We don't want these cards, which are supposed to build friendship, to cause problems. There are other open-ended cards that are open-ended question cards that get you in the habit of asking each other more open-ended questions about the things that are important to one another. And then when we ask an open-ended question, we just stay with that one topic and follow it up with other open-ended questions that help our partner to open up and to reveal, what they'd like about something, or how they'd like to manage something, and stuff like that. So these are both available in the 7 Principles book, and they're also available in the free Gottman online card decks in those app stores that I mentioned before. Finally, an interesting thing happened. My friend, my colleague, Dr. Bob Navarra, developed these recovery cards for people who are dealing with addictions, and where both partners are kind of getting into recovery and wanting to check in with how it's going, but also not wanting to get too intrusive or ask too much all at once. And so he developed all these cards. This is a special card deck. At times, the word addiction comes up because they're originally made for people dealing with addiction, but all you have to substitute is illness, or brain cancer, or whatever you'd like to do. So these are like fears I had about starting recovery or getting help, what it has been like to be with others with similar struggles. Is there a meditation or a spiritual practice that is helping me? I use spiritual practice. How I feel talking with or telling our family about illness. So there are all these really interesting questions that people can choose from to ask one another. And I think they do limit it to maybe 1 or 2 a day, so no one gets very overwhelmed. But they become a nice opportunity to maybe have some discussions that you've been finding it harder to have, a little at a time.
And Dr. McNulty, there was a couple that came in through the chat that I just wanted to share with everyone that were great questions.
Okay.
What is the hardest part of the journey for you? Which is a great question. And someone else has suggested, what brings you joy in your most challenging moments?
Okay. Oh gosh, those are wonderful. Naomi, thank you for bringing those up, and thank you to the folks who made those suggestions. And I'll trust Naomi will keep an eye on the chat and let me know when stuff like that comes up. So please, please, please keep entering your questions into or questions or ideas into the chat. So the second part of the house, so the first part of the house is love maps, and that's about knowing each other. That's a basis of the friendship between the partners. The second part of the second level of the sound relationship house is sharing fondness and admiration. And I remember a story once. I worked with this couple, and this was years and years ago, but they came in and the woman had together they had 5 children under 5. And the man was brilliant, but had horrible ADD and would work long hours. And by the time he would get home, he'd have no mental energy left. And so she felt like she was of little use to him, or he was of little use to her during such a difficult time. And she had no family who lived in state. So she began to talk about their story, which is part of what we do when people come in for Gottman couples therapy. We go back to the beginning of how they met and try to understand the whole story, including the positive things that have happened. And this occurs after we've talked about the issues or concerns that bring them to therapy. But I remember she said, I met him at a cowboy bar and he was wearing these boots and he looked stupid. And so I felt so bad for the guy. He was so beaten down by her list of complaints, which were understandable. But then to have said that after that as a way to open the story, I was so worried. But then she said, the next day I met him for lunch and he came in his business suit and he was the most attractive man that I had ever seen. And he was just shocked. He had never heard her say that to him before. He did not know that that's how he came off to her on that second date. And then so the moral of the story is that sometimes I think when we appreciate our partners, we think that they can read our minds. And it's so important to be able to say the things day in, day out, like 2 or 3 things, that you appreciate about your partner, and really make note of them. And the reason that that's so important is that relationships really get into trouble when people are scanning for the negative. But the opposite is true as well, that when people turn around and scan for the positive, it just makes a world of difference. I think of another couple who were really having a negative day, and I just said, can we stop and try to appreciate each other for a moment? And the woman said to the man, I have all these illnesses, and you go out every week and find me all the foods that I need to have in my diet. You find me all these supplements. I don't know how I'd ever find those without you. And well, the man turned around, and granted, these people were being like negative for 45 minutes and just battling each other pretty harshly. But then the man turned around to her and said, well, my family is so difficult, and I see their name come up on the caller ID and I want to run for the hills, but you know how to pick up that phone and exactly what to say to them to keep them in check. And you are just great at it. I don't know how you do it. But so when people express their appreciation to one another and get back in touch with what they appreciate, it really helps them to hold on to the positivity between them. Even if every other day they're going to have to face some sort of problem together where they might be in conflict, as long as they also make sure that during those days to scan for the positive and to say 2 or 3 things that make that where they share their positivity with each other, that helps so much. Here is an exercise that we have, and this is also in the Give Appreciation card deck in the Gottman card decks, the free Gottman card decks, and it's also in the 7 Principles book. But it's an I appreciate checklist. So sometimes what we will suggest to couples is having a time each day where for about 10 minutes or 15 minutes, they both circle 3 things that they have really appreciated about each other in the last week or so. So it has to be fairly recent, for it to work well. And then it has to be very sincere, so one of them might be, you were absolutely beautiful when we went to that benefit the other night. In fact, I was kind of intimidated to go there, kind of knowing those folks that hang out there. But when I saw how beautiful you were and had you on my arm, it just made the whole thing workable. So, I mean, like that might be one example. So it's an example. It's a word from the list or another positive word that you can think of. And then you couple it with an example and you share that. And that keeps people scanning for the positive, and that keeps people, feeling more positive about one another and seeing the relationship in a more balanced way. When we think about couples facing brain cancer, when they remember to share fondness and admiration and appreciate one another, it really helps partners, to counterbalance all that stress and conflict and negativity that would come about from being under more stress. When we're under more stress, we tend to get more negative, and it's harder to be in touch with the positive. And so the whole thing is to try to rebalance that. Let me keep going here. The next level of the house is turning towards, and throughout the day, partners make emotional bids to connect with one another. So that can be like, if a goofy neighbor, kind of says something goofy as you're taking a walk, you might both look at each other and give each other a knowing glance. That's a bid made for connection, whoever initiated the glance. And if the other person gives the glance back, then that's a bid for connection made or received. Another bid would be like, I just want to tell you this joke that I heard today. I think you'll really like it. If the other person says, okay, then that really is another bid made and received. If they say okay, and then they appreciate the joke, or there's some stuff that happened in the neighborhood today that I got to tell you about, that's another bid. So being aware of all those different bids, and they progressively get larger, people might say, hey, I want to have tea with you this afternoon, or I want to watch that new show that we're liking so much with you. So it's when people hear each other's bids and don't turn away from them, but turn towards one another and connect, that it's like putting a positive deposit in the emotional bank account of the relationship. And the more positive deposits we have, the more people are positioned to deal with conflict and stress together. So, because if you're feeling very positive about your partner, you're going to treat them a whole lot better than if you don't. And this is day-to-day small moments. So these two folks, I just imagine one who was dancing around and wanted the other to dance. And so that would have been a bid made and received. Now, bids are, we build rituals of connection, which is a way of kind of formalizing bids and making them work in our life together. So the man who developed this concept was a man by the name of Bill Doherty from the University of Minnesota, Dr. Bill Doherty, and he wrote a book called The Intentional Family. And he found that when he would have tea with his wife and be called on call to their children for their homework each day, that they were really close. But then when the girls went off to college and they no longer needed to do it and they discontinued it, it created distance in their relationship. So they figured out, this is a bid that we need to be able to, this is a ritual that we need to be able to be closer to one another. And it probably promoted both closeness and a more meaningful relationship for them. I'm sure it did. I'm just going to note again that the exercise for this is available online in the card decks and in the 7 principles for making marriage work. I'm looking at the time and I'm going to try and move a little more quickly. I'm sorry that I've got a lot of material. So basically, what you want to do when you're dealing with this, cancer and facing brain cancer, is to adapt your rituals or create new rituals, but don't just cancel the rituals that you have. Either adapt them or come up with something new, because people still need that sense of connection with one another. And as I said, there's suggestions for specific rituals on the Gottman card decks. So the next part of the sound relationship house is about managing conflict. And what's important to remember there is that first and foremost, we've got to be careful about not being in fight or flight syndrome. So when our muscles get tense, or we sweat when we're trying to have a discussion with our spouse, or we have a nervous stomach, or we can feel our pulse rates accelerate, then that usually means that we're shifted into fight or flight syndrome. And the way that you can tell, if you have Fitbits or if you just know how to take your pulse, you can, if your pulse is above 100 beats per minute or 85 if you're athletic, then it means you're flooded. We call this flooding in the Gottman method. And so it includes the symptoms that I've just listed, And what you need to do is to take a break at that point and come back to this situation about 30 minutes later, because when you're flooded, you can't take in new information and you can't think creatively. So when you're that upset, have a hand sign that you give each other that can't be the third finger, the middle finger, but you have to give them some sort of other hand signal, and then take that 30-minute break and then come back to talking again about the issue. But you got to be careful about that. The other thing that I suggest to people is doing a gentle startup. So you're going to have lots of complaints living closely together in life in general, but also that much more living closely together in such a difficult situation. So you want to try to complain without blame. You don't want to use a bunch of you statements. Like, you always forget to take out the trash. You don't care about everything that needs to be done around the house, etc. Instead, you want to say, I feel about what and I need. So you might say, I just feel so disappointed or so frustrated when you forget to take out the trash. I'm trying to keep the house clean and I just can't do that right now with my balance is off, and that's so hard for me. But it makes me so depressed to look at the trash building up. And so I know you're doing a lot, but I just need you to cover that one base too. And so that's kind of how you'd say it instead. And then you try to give appreciation. So I appreciate all that you're doing, and I appreciate your hearing me out on this. So we want to try to complain without blame, and then for the person hearing the complaint to avoid being defensive. The other thing that we want to do is to manage conflict. So when it comes up to these ongoing issues, like maybe how to deal with a family member, whether or not to go back to work, whether or not to pursue different treatments that are being recommended. What you do is you slow down the discussion and you interview each other using a list of questions that are on the next page. And you try to just listen to your partner. When you're the interviewer, all you do is just listen. You don't, and you try to understand. And understanding doesn't mean you agree. It just means you're taking time to put your own thoughts to the side and really try to understand why the issue is important to your partner. So create a comfortable space where your partner can open up, and don't ask questions. Don't question them. Don't say, is that what you really want? Really? Or if that's what you want, why did you want this? You only want to ask questions more like, tell me more about that. I hadn't heard that more from you before. Explain that more. Or it's good to be reminded of that. Can you remind me a little bit more? And really try to empathize, because people manage conflict better when both parties feel respected. These are the questions, tell me your values or what you think about this position. Is there a story about it, that relates to your childhood? That might help me to understand you better. What are the key feelings involved? What are the key needs involved? Is there a deeper dream behind your position? Is there a life dream, or what does your position mean to you? And then finally, is there a disaster scenario if I'm unable to honor your position on this issue? Then we move to switching roles. And then the second partner asks the questions, and the second partner interviews the first. The second partner asks the same questions, listens, and tries to be curious. The second partner empathizes with the first. And hopefully in the end, both partners will feel more deeply understood. If you really try to listen and just let your partner say where they're coming from and why their position on the issue is so important to them. And if you let them then hear the same from you, often couples will have like these aha moments and be like, oh, I didn't know that that's what that meant to you. That makes more sense to me. Well, and then inside they're thinking, well, maybe I can be more flexible around that. So when you compromise, you come up a list with where you cannot be flexible on the issue, and a list of where you can be flexible. and you compare those lists to each other. And both partners share their list to see if they can come up with a compromise. And we always yield to win. So if your partner needs something and and you have it within your realm to give it to them, then give it to them. If it's possible, and you're willing to let whatever the issue is go because it's not as important to you. We always yield to win. And because that sets up that's a good culture to have in a relationship, and that's a good culture to have in a family. As I said before, when we have conflict, we're much more poised to be able to help people make their life dreams come true. Life dreams are particularly important to couples facing brain cancer. Partners need their dreams to be honored and to worked with and known. So we want to make sure that we're always trying to do so. And again, when you talk about conflicts, you become more aware of one another's dreams and what's important to one another, and you're better positioned to help each other with that. The top of the house is creating shared meaning. So basically, when people are facing cancer, facing brain cancer, it may be a good time to revisit, like, what are your goals at this point in time? What's most important to you now? What are your individual goals? What are our shared goals? What rituals will help you and I live life in a more meaningful way now? Or what rituals might be fun for us as we're trying to deal with so much stress and a difficult time? Sometimes people need to look at what different things mean to them. Their symbols may shift around depending upon what they're feeling like they're able to do or have the energy to do, or that kind of stuff. What roles are they playing in each other's lives and in the world, and how can they be supportive of each other's roles? And finally, what is their mission and legacy? How does each partner view their mission and legacy? How can partners support one another's individual and shared mission and legacy? So I hope that this information helps. Basically, you're supposed to review it and then figure out, okay, how can I incorporate this stuff into my life on a regular basis, and make it a little system to help you keep actively working on the relationship, where a time where active work could really help. So thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. McNulty.
Oh, you're welcome.
I wrote down yield to win. I love that. I'm going to post that on a post-it, put it everywhere on my house. Yield to win. And I guess winning in this sense really means connecting, right? It's really about winning, not winning an argument, but it's winning for the sake of the relationship.
Right, exactly. It's sort of like the idea that, if your partner wants you to do something a certain way, and you don't really want to do it that way, but you understand why they need that, then you say, okay, I don't have to do it my way. I can do it their way. And then the winning part is that you make that willingness to compromise, that willingness to honor, when you realize something is more important to your partner than it is to you, that willingness to then yield to them is such an important thing to set up in a relationship.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, this is so rich. I think we have a few minutes for questions, maybe. So if those of you who have questions would like to type it into the Q&A, you can do that anonymously. You could also put it into the chat. So I do have a question as we're waiting for others to type in theirs. Is there any advice you have if there's someone who feels like their partner is not really interested in these kinds of activities or making the effort?
I was going to do, and I'm just going to bring us back to the sound relationship house, so
Sure.
that way people will think of all the different areas we covered. There you go. So yes, I do. If their partner's not, into coming in, I think I mentioned that when we lead this couples workshop, when we lead the workshop, it goes all day Saturday and all day Sunday. And we always start out by welcoming the person who is there because they want to be there, and then the one who more came involuntarily. And what we find is that when people stay with us over the course of the weekend, everyone leaves glad they came, because I think our workshop in particular is great because we teach all of this stuff. We do role plays to show people how to put it into action in their lives. And then they just go off and practice on their own. And if they have a question, they let us know, but they don't have to go into a group or share with anyone. They could the whole weekend is about working on their relationship and working their way through all these tools. If someone is struggling to get their partner to work on this kind of stuff, they may just tell their partner, read the John Gottman book, because a lot of people who are like less intuitive, but more into research or math or logic, will really like that book and find it fascinating. And then they'll see like the logical reasons why to do these things, why they're so important. And so that book, or even seeing a video of John Gottman, I think he's got some videos on YouTube of him just talking to people in libraries about his work and what he found in his work, that often that really helps people to buy in.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Yeah, because I can imagine a strong relationship would be helpful for both parties kind of dealing with their own stresses in life as well, like not just necessarily for the sake of the relationship, but just for their own well-being to have that connection in their lives.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I'd say sometimes I think the partner who didn't want to come, or the partner who reads a book and then comes to couples therapy or something like that, they're often the one who likes it even more once they get going with it. I've had there's one exercise called the stress reducing conversation, where we encourage people just to sit down and debrief about their days with each other and just listen to each other and listen to the emotions that are going on and show support, show empathy. And a lot of times men haven't been socialized to do this because their upbringing just didn't include much of that. But when they end up like taking a walk with their partner, every night, and turning off the phones, and it all just begins to come naturally. And then they have to have it, that they'll be like, we didn't get our walk in today or something like that. And then they never thought that they would be there. So generally, the thinking is that women are more naturally socialized to do this. So for some men, it may be more of a learning curve to learn how to do, but once they do it, they seem to like it a lot.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, sure.
So I don't see any more questions coming in through the chat, but I know that many people are looking forward to the after the show. So
Okay.
do you want to maybe let people know what we might be doing for that?
Sure. Well, what I hoped I could do is in some ways kind of walk you through, modified versions of the exercises so we could play around with them a little bit. For instance, with soft startup, how might you say some of the things that are hard to say, would be something that could work on, if you think like certain tensions come up and you're wanting to sort of express a complaint without it turning into a big deal, you could talk about what that is, and we could help you to be able to develop a gentle startup that helps you to talk about your complaint without blaming. I also have just kind of fun role play scenarios where I could just throw out different harsh startups, and you can work on making them into gentle startups. And I'm sure we'd have some similar ways in which we could play around with the other exercises too.
Yeah, That's great. That's wonderful. Well, I want to thank you, Dr. McNulty, so much for just giving us such rich and just a comprehensive bucket of strategies, toolbox, I guess I should say, of strategies to use for couples, no matter kind of where they are in their relationship. It's just been a real, just a pleasure to hear you talk about it. And thank you so much for your generosity and being with our group. Yeah.
You're very welcome, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for those of you that are attending and leaving us now. We really hope that you join us again for a future webinar. Our next month's webinar is going to be on cognitive strategies for organization. So I think that'll be really wonderful. And that's with our neuropsychologist, Dr. Christina Weyer-Jamora. And I'm going to stop the recording now. Thank you all so much for attending.